The derelict tumbled through the Vennari shallows like something the void had chewed on and spat back, and surveyor Kale Drenith logged its silhouette before the optical array had even finished resolving. Terran hull, single-seat frame. The ion trails behind it were so old they had scattered into background noise, indistinguishable from cosmic dust. 41 standard years of drift, the instrument said. Kale reran the calculation. 41 years confirmed. He keyed the frequency reserved for his department head. Cataloger Vennis, I have a Terran vessel in the shallows, single-occupant configuration, no power signature, no beacon. Vennis took 4 seconds longer than usual to respond. Condition. Hull is intact, microabrasion consistent with 4 decades of unshielded drift. No weapons damage, no distress marker. Kale paused. There is a viewport forward-facing. I can see something inside. Recover it, Vennis said. Full documentation protocol. Touch nothing until the archivists arrive. Kale had served the Vennari Cooperative Survey Corps for 11 years. He had catalogued wrecks from 9 species, pulled data cores from shattered frigates, identified remains that no longer resembled the beings they had been. He approached the tumbling craft with the mechanical calm his training demanded, matching its rotation with his grapple arms and stabilizing it against his survey skiff's belly clamps. The viewport was scratched but unbroken. He brought his skiff's floodlights to bear and pressed his face to his own observation port. A human woman sat in the pilot's seat. Her flight suit was intact, a muted gray-blue with mission markings he did not recognize. Her hands rested on the dead controls, fingers still curled around the thrust levers. Her head was tilted slightly forward, chin nearly touching her chest as though she had simply fallen asleep. The vacuum had preserved her. No decay, no bloating. She looked as though she might lift her head and speak. But it was the patch that stopped him. On the left breast of her suit, slightly above the mission insignia, someone had stitched a small square of white fabric. The stitching was uneven, clearly done by hand, clearly not regulation. And on that fabric, in a child's careful, oversized handwriting, 2 words had been written in black ink that 4 decades of cold and radiation had not quite managed to fade. Come back. Kale stared at it for a long time. Then he began his documentation log, and he did not stop recording for the next 9 hours. What follows is the Vennari Cooperative's reconstruction of the events surrounding Terran pilot Commander Maren Elody, registry designation Solace 7, compiled from recovered flight data, 3 Terran naval archives, and testimony given under formal inquiry by cooperative personnel. Kale Drenith served as primary investigator. The reconstruction is presented in the order the evidence was recovered, which is not the order in which events occurred. This is deliberate. Understanding requires context, and context arrived late. The first thing the data core surrendered was the end. Commander Elody's final flight recorder entry was timestamped 11 minutes before all systems ceased. Her voice was calm, unhurried, the kind of calm that comes not from the absence of fear, but from the decision to set it aside. Solace 7, this is Elody. I am at the threshold of the barren rift. Drive is nominal. Shielding is at 14% and dropping. I am proceeding to deployment depth for the anchor charge. A pause, the sound of her breathing, measured and deliberate. Flight, be advised. There is no return trajectory from deployment depth. I have run the calculations 9 times. The rift's gravitational shear exceeds my drive capacity by a factor of 3.2. Once I cross the threshold, I will not have enough thrust to climb back out. This is not an emergency. This is the mission profile. I knew this at launch. Elody out. Kale played that recording 4 times before he trusted his translation matrix. Not because the words were unclear, because the tone was. She was not panicking. She was not grieving. She was filing a status report in the same voice she might have used to note a course correction. He pulled more. The barren rift. Kale had to cross-reference Terran navigational databases to find it, because the cooperative called it something else. The Vennari designation was the devouring scar, a gravitational anomaly at the edge of the Pelori Reach that had been expanding for 60 years at the time of Elody's flight. Not a black hole, something worse, in its way. A tear in the spatial fabric that pulled matter and energy into a cascading collapse, growing wider with each year, consuming star systems at an accelerating rate. By the time Elody flew, the rift had swallowed 3 inhabited worlds, 2 Vennari colonies, 1 Pelori station, 11 million dead in total, and the projections showed it would consume 7 more systems within a decade if its expansion was not arrested. The Terrans called it a spatial bleed. They had a theory that the expansion could be halted if a precisely calibrated gravitational anchor was detonated at the rift's deepest point, its origin. The math was Terran. The anchor device was Terran. The delivery method was Terran. No one else had the shielding technology to survive long enough to reach deployment depth, and even the Terrans could only manage it in a single-seat, purpose-built craft with hull plating so dense it could barely maneuver. 1 pilot, 1 ship, 1 chance. Kale found the mission briefing files next. They were surprisingly short. Commander Maren Elody, age 37 at launch. 15 years of deep space navigation experience. Selected from a volunteer pool of 41 pilots, all of whom understood the mission's terminal nature. The briefing documents used the phrase one-way deployment 7 times. She had a daughter. The personnel file noted it without emphasis. Daughter Lyra Elody, age 6 at time of mission launch. Guardian transfer documented. Next of kin notification prepared. Kale looked at the patch on the dead woman's suit again through his observation port. Come back. He understood now whose handwriting it was. The data core gave up its secrets in layers, and Kale worked through them methodically, the way he had been trained. Environmental telemetry first, then navigational records, then communications logs, then, buried in a secondary partition that the engineers had not expected to survive 4 decades of dormancy, the personal files. Before he reached those, he found something else. A maintenance log from the ship's construction phase at the Terran naval yards above a world called Meridian. The ship itself had no name. It was designated Solace 7, 7th in a line of 8 identical single-seat penetration craft. The other 7 had been built as backups. Only one would fly. The maintenance log showed that all 8 had been constructed simultaneously, tested simultaneously, and maintained simultaneously for 14 months, waiting for the mission window. 14 months of building a ship whose only purpose was to carry one person to a place from which they could not return. The engineering notes were meticulous. Hull density calculations, shielding attenuation projections, thermal tolerance modeling. Every figure pointed to the same conclusion. The craft could reach deployment depth, but it could not come back. The engineers knew. They built it anyway. They triple-checked every weld and every seal on a ship they knew would become a coffin. One engineer's personal annotation caught Kale's attention. It was appended to the final quality assurance sign-off, technically a violation of documentation protocol. It read, "Solace 7 is the finest ship I have ever built. I hate that this is true." The second timeline emerged from the Terran Naval Archives, and it was this one that Kale found difficult to process in the clinical manner his training demanded. 12 days before launch, Commander Elody filed a formal request to visit her daughter at the residential facility, where Lyra had been placed in preparation for the Guardian transfer. The request was granted. The visit was logged at 3 hours and 41 minutes. There was no recording of the visit itself, privacy protocols, but Elody's personal data pad, recovered from the cockpit, contained a series of notes she had written to herself in the days that followed. Kale's translation matrix handled them without difficulty. The difficulty was elsewhere. Day 10 before launch. She asked me if space is cold. I said yes. She asked if my ship would keep me warm. I said yes. She asked if I would come back. I said I would try. Day 8 before launch, Lyra made me a patch for my suit. White fabric from a medical kit. She wrote on it with a marker she stole from the education module, "Come back," 2 words. She stitched it on herself. The stitches are crooked. I will not remove it. Day 7 before launch. The flight surgeon saw the patch during my pre-mission physical. She said it was not regulation. I said I was aware. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at me, then wrote in her medical log that the patch presented no interference with suit functionality. She did not ask me to remove it. Day 6 before launch. I reran the return trajectory calculations today for the 11th time. The answer has not changed. There is no return trajectory. The gravitational shear at deployment depth exceeds my drive capacity by a factor of 3.2. I have known this since I volunteered. Knowing it does not change anything. Not knowing it would not change anything either. Day 5 before launch. Commander Reth, who was the second candidate on the selection list, stopped me in the corridor today. He did not say anything about the mission. He looked at the patch on my suit. He said his son had given him a coin. A small copper coin from Earth, very old, with a woman's face on it. He said he would have carried it in his flight suit pocket if he had been selected. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Day 4 before launch. I asked the engineering team if there was any possibility of increasing the drive output. They said no. I asked if the anchor could be deployed from a shallower depth. They said no. I asked if a remote delivery system could be designed. They said not in time. The rift will consume the Pelori homeworld in 9 months. There is no time. Day 3 before launch. The Pelori ambassador visited the launch facility today. He brought a delegation of 7. They stood in the observation gallery and watched the launch preparation through the glass. One of them, a young Pelori with pale markings who I was told was a cultural historian, pressed both hands flat against the glass and stood there for 20 minutes without moving. I do not know what that gesture means in Pelori culture. The liaison officer said it is the highest form of witness. That it means I see you and I will not look away. I am not sure the historian was looking at me. I think he was looking at the ship. Day 2 before launch. I looked at the patch again this morning. The ink is already slightly faded from where I keep touching it. I need to stop touching it. I will not stop touching it. Day 1 before launch. I said goodbye to Lyra through the comm screen. She held up a drawing she had made. It was me in my ship flying home. The ship was very large and the stars were very small and I was smiling. She said she would hang it on the wall so I could see it when I got back. I told her I loved her. She said she loved me too and to remember the patch. I said I would remember. Kale set the data pad down. He walked to the far side of his survey skiff and stood with his back to the viewport for several minutes. When he returned, his documentation log showed a gap of exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. He did not note the reason for the gap, which was itself a departure from standard protocol. He continued reading. The launch was unremarkable. The Terran naval records showed a clean departure from Way Station Sierra, a Terran outpost at the edge of the Pelori Reach. Elody's telemetry was steady. Her voice on the comm channels was professional, precise, and without tremor. The Way Station's command staff watched the departure from the operations center. The commanding officer, a rear admiral named Soria Vasic, was recorded on the facility's ambient audio saying one sentence after Elody's ship cleared the departure corridor. Log it. All of it. Every second. The flight to the rift's outer boundary took 4 days. Elody's flight recorder captured routine navigation updates, system checks, and 1 personal entry per day. The personal entries were brief. Transit Day 1, drive nominal, shielding holding. I ate the ration pack Lyra picked out for me. She chose the one with the dried fruit because she said fruit is good for long trips. She was right. It was good. Transit Day 2. Past the outer boundary marker for the second Vennari colony that was consumed. Nothing there now, not even debris. The rift does not leave wreckage, it just takes. I spent an hour looking at the empty coordinates where 300,000 Vennari lived. There is nothing to see. That is the worst part. Transit Day 3. Shielding has begun degrading. Expected. The radiation at this proximity is unlike anything I have encountered. The hull temperature is climbing. I adjusted the thermal regulators. I touched the patch. The ink is holding. I can feel the stitches through my glove. They are crooked and uneven, and they are the most precisely placed things on this ship. Transit Day 4. I can see the rift now. It does not look like the simulations. The simulations showed a mathematical curve, a gravity well rendered in false color. The real thing is a wound. There is no other word. The stars around it are stretched and bent and wrong, and the darkness at its center is not the darkness of space. Space is empty. This is hungry. I am proceeding to deployment depth. Kale cross-referenced this timeline against the cooperative's own records. The Vennari had been monitoring the rift's expansion from a network of observation platforms at what they calculated was a safe distance. During Elody's 4-day transit, the rift consumed a small uninhabited moon in the Pelori system's outer ring. The Vennari instruments recorded the event with clinical precision. Mass absorbed, gravitational field alteration, projected expansion, rate updated. The observation platform's duty analyst, a Vennari named Tessal Korin, made a note in the daily log that Kale found significant. It read, "Expansion rate has increased by 0.3% since last measurement cycle. At current acceleration, the rift will reach the Pelori homeworld's orbital path in approximately 8 months, 14 days. Recommend upgrading threat classification from amber observational to red imminent." The recommendation was filed. It was not acted upon for 11 days because the cooperative's threat classification committee met on a fixed schedule, and the next meeting was not until then. By the time the committee convened, Elody was already inside the rift. The Vennari did not know she was there. They did not know the Terrans had a plan. They did not know about the anchor device, the volunteer pool, the 41 pilots, the 8 identical ships. They did not know about the patch. They were preparing evacuation projections for the Pelori homeworld, 18 million people who would need to be relocated within 8 months. A logistical impossibility that every analyst on the observation platform understood was a logistical impossibility, but documented in full anyway. Because documentation was what the Vennari did when the numbers turned against them. The final approach took 6 hours. Elody's telemetry showed her hull temperature climbing steadily, her shielding degrading from 14% to 9 to 6. The gravitational shear pulled at her ship in ways that the Terran engineers had predicted but never tested outside of simulation. Her voice remained steady. Solace 7, Elody, I am at 80% depth, shielding at 6. Hull integrity nominal, but temperature is exceeding projections by 12%. Adjusting approach vector. The anchor charge reads nominal. Deployment mechanism is green. 20 minutes later, 90% depth, shielding at 4. I have lost starboard maneuvering thruster. Port thrusters compensating. There is a vibration in the hull that I do not like. It is not in the engineering models. The ship is experiencing stress that was not predicted. Kale noted the precision of her language. Not the ship is shaking or something is wrong. She identified the anomaly, classified it, and noted its absence from the predictive models. Even here, falling into the throat of something that had eaten worlds she was observing, documenting, doing the work. 92% depth. The vibration has intensified. Starboard hull panel temperature is at 140% of maximum rated tolerance. I am hearing the metal. It is making sounds I have never heard metal make. High-pitched, almost tonal. The engineers would want to know about this. A brief, dry sound that Kale's translation matrix initially flagged as a transmission artifact. On the 4th listen, he identified it as a laugh. A single, short, quiet laugh. The human pilot, falling into a gravitational wound with her hull screaming around her, had laughed, not from hysteria, from something else. An awareness, perhaps, of the absurdity of noting engineering data that no engineer would ever read. 95%, shielding at 2. I have lost port thrusters. Descent is now gravitational. I am no longer flying. I am falling. The anchor is armed. I will deploy manually at the origin point. For the record, the vibration has resolved. The ship has stopped fighting the shear. I think the hull has accepted it. I understand the feeling. 3 minutes later, 98%. Shielding is effectively gone. Hull temperature is critical. The origin point is visible on my instruments. 4 minutes. I can see something on the sensor display. The origin looks different from the models. 2 minutes later, 99%, I can see it. The origin, it is not what we expected. It is smaller than the models predicted. Much smaller, almost delicate, like a crack in glass. All of this, all those systems, all those worlds, all those 300,000 Vennari and the Pelori station, and every living thing the rift has taken, from something that small. 1 minute later, I am at deployment depth. The anchor is deploying now. A pause of 11 seconds. Anchor away, detonation in 90 seconds. I'm attempting to climb. This was the part of the recording that Kale had to listen to most carefully, because it was the part where Maren Elody stopped being a mission profile and became a person making a choice she had already made. Her drive fired. The telemetry showed maximum thrust, everything the damaged ship could produce. She climbed for 19 seconds. She gained 12 kilometers of altitude against the gravitational shear. Then the drive output began dropping as the shear overwhelmed it. She gained another 3 kilometers, then 2, then 1. Then the numbers stopped climbing and began to fall. She was being pulled back. Solace 7, Elody. Her voice was still calm. Drive at maximum. Ascent rate is negative. I am being drawn back toward the origin. Detonation in 51 seconds. I will not clear the blast radius. A pause. Flight, this is expected. This is the mission profile. The anchor is deployed and the timer is running. The rift will close. That is what matters. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had not changed in volume or steadiness, but something in its texture had shifted. Not toward fear, toward something else. Something Kale did not have a Vennari word for. Lyra, if anyone plays this for you someday, I want you to know something. I did try. Your patch is still here and I did try. The math would not let me come back, but the trying was real. Every second of thrust was real. I did not just accept it. I fought the numbers and they won, but the fight was real. 12 seconds of silence. I love you. I am looking at the patch right now. Come back, it says. I know, sweetheart, I know. The anchor detonated 7 seconds later. The gravitational pulse collapsed the rift's origin point. The cascading spatial bleed reversed. The expansion stopped. The 3 systems in the rift's projected path were spared. 18 million lives on the Pelori homeworld continued without knowing how close they had come or who had paid the price. Elody's ship was thrown outward by the blast wave, tumbling dead, its drive burned out and its pilot already gone. The telemetry ended. The data core ran on backup power for another 6 hours, recording nothing but silence and the slow tumble of a ship with no one at the controls. Elody's ship was thrown clear on a trajectory that the Cooperative's observation platforms detected as a minor debris event. Analyst Tessal Corin, the same Vennari who had recommended the threat classification upgrade 11 days earlier, logged the reading at 03:47 station time. Anomalous energy signature consistent with gravitational collapse event. Debris ejected on bearing 274. Rift expansion has ceased. Repeating, expansion has ceased. Origin point no longer detectable. Corin ran the measurements 3 times. The rift was not expanding, it was not stable, it was closing. The wound was sealing itself, the cascading spatial bleed reversing as the origin point collapsed. Within 6 hours, the rift had contracted by 40%. Within 2 days, it was gone entirely. The space it had occupied was empty, unremarkable, as though nothing had ever been there. The cooperative's official report attributed the closure to a spontaneous gravitational equilibrium event, a natural correction in the spatial fabric. This was the explanation that entered the textbooks, the one taught in Pelori schools, the one Vennari analysts cited in their papers. It was wrong, and it remained unchallenged for 29 years until the Terran records were declassified. Corin herself was dead by then, lost to a routine illness 7 years after the rift closed. She never knew that the debris reading she had logged at 03:47 was not debris at all, but a single-seat Terran spacecraft carrying the body of a woman who had just saved her homeworld's closest allies. She never knew about the patch. There is a particular cruelty in the gap between an event and its understanding. The rift closed in real time. The knowledge of why took 41 years to arrive, and it arrived not through declassification or diplomatic channels, but through the tumbling hull of a dead ship found by a surveyor in the shallows. 41 years of drift, 41 years of silence, 41 years of a dead woman's hands on dead controls, a patch on her chest catching no light, bearing 2 words no one could read. Until Kale. He finished the initial data extraction on the 2nd day. The archivists arrived on the 3rd, aboard a cooperative transport that also carried a Vennari cultural attaché named Pelin, a Pelori delegation of 3, and a Terran naval liaison who had been stationed at a nearby outpost. The Terran liaison was a young man, perhaps 30, with the kind of professional composure that Kale recognized from his own training. His name was Lieutenant Commander Maren Elody. He boarded the derelict with Kale and stood in the cramped cockpit looking at Commander Elody for a long time without speaking. The cockpit was small, barely room for the pilot's seat, the control panel, and a narrow storage compartment behind the headrest. Elody had to duck to enter. He stood hunched, one hand braced against the bulkhead, and looked at the woman in the chair. "We knew about the mission," he said finally. "The records were declassified 12 years ago. We knew she succeeded. We knew the rift closed. We did not know where her ship ended up." "It drifted," Kale said, 41 years. The blast wave sent it on a trajectory out of the reach entirely. It has been tumbling through open space since before either of us was born." Valk looked at the patch. "Her daughter," he said. "Yes," Kale said. "The personnel file mentioned her. Lyra Elody. She would be 47 now." 48, Valk corrected quietly. "She is a navigation instructor at the Sierra Academy. She teaches deep space piloting." He paused. "She has been petitioning the Terran Navy to search for her mother's ship for 23 years. Kale absorbed this. 23 years of petitions. The mathematics of grief, filed in triplicate and resubmitted annually. A woman spending half her adult life writing formal requests to an institution, asking them to find a ship that everyone knew was empty, asking them to bring back a body that everyone knew was dead, because the alternative was to stop asking, and she had decided that stopping was worse than being refused. "There is something else," Kale said. He brought up his documentation photographs on his data slate and showed Valk the images he had taken of the cockpit's interior. "Look at the control panel, her right hand." Valk leaned closer to the image. Elody's right hand was curled around the thrust lever, as Kale had noted in his initial observation. But the high-resolution photograph showed something more. The rubber grip on the lever was worn smooth in a specific pattern. 5 small depressions where fingers had gripped and regripped, over and over, hard enough and long enough to deform the material. "She was squeezing the thrust lever," Kale said, "during the climb attempt. 19 seconds of maximum thrust. The rubber shows the force of her grip. She was holding on." Valk stared at the photograph. Not to the lever, Kale continued. The lever was already at maximum position. There was no additional thrust to gain from gripping harder. She was holding on because holding on was what she was doing. It was the physical expression of the attempt itself. The mission records show Commander Elody attempted to climb out, Kale said. Maximum thrust for 19 seconds. She gained 15 kilometers against the gravitational shear before it pulled her back. I read the file, Valk said. She was not simply accepting the terminal trajectory, Kale continued, because he needed to say this, because something in the data had lodged in him and he did not know another way to dislodge it. The return was impossible. She knew it was impossible. She had calculated it 11 times, but she engaged the drive at maximum and she fought for every meter. 19 seconds of full thrust against a force 3.2 times greater than her engine could overcome. Valk was quiet for a moment. That is what humans do, he said. We fight the math even when we know. That is not rational, Kale said. No, the liaison agreed. It is not. Kale looked at the patch again. The child's handwriting. The uneven stitches. The 2 words that had survived 4 decades of vacuum and radiation, and the slow tumble of a dead ship through empty space. I must ask, he said, for the formal record, was the mission a success? The rift closed, Valk said. The Pelori homeworld survived. 3 systems that were in the projected expansion path are still inhabited. 18 million lives at minimum can be attributed to the anchor deployment. And the cost? Valk looked at the woman in the pilot's seat, her hands on the dead controls, her chin tilted forward, the patch with its fading ink and its crooked stitches. 1, he said. The cultural attaché, Pelin, requested a separate session with Kale after Valk had departed the derelict. She was older than Kale, with the precise diction and deliberate cadence of someone who spent their career weighing the meaning of words before releasing them. Surveyor Drenith, I have reviewed your preliminary documentation. I have a question that falls outside the technical parameters of your report. Ask it, Kale said. The pilot's personal log entries, the ones from the days before launch. You described them in your preliminary notes as difficult to process in the clinical manner your training demands. Can you elaborate? Kale considered this. The entries are factual. They record events, observations, decisions. They are not emotional in their language. She does not describe grief or fear or doubt in explicit terms. She describes what happened, what was said, what she calculated. And yet, Pelin said, and yet they are the most emotionally significant documents I have encountered in 11 years of survey work. The restraint in them is the mechanism. She does not say that she is afraid. She records that she reran the return trajectory for the 11th time. She does not say that she misses her daughter. She records that the ink on the patch is fading because she keeps touching it. The emotion is in the behavior, not the language. Pelin's secondary eyelids narrowed. You are describing a species-specific communication trait. The Terrans encode emotional content in action rather than declaration. Yes, Kale said. And the patch is the ultimate expression of it. The child did not write I love you. She wrote come back, an instruction, a demand, a request that contains within it the entire weight of what it means to want someone to survive. 2 words, no ambiguity, no abstraction, come back. And the mother carried it. Carried it, touched it, wore it through 4 days of transit and 6 hours of descent into a gravitational wound, wore it during the 19 seconds when she tried to climb back out, was wearing it when her ship went dark and began its 41 years of drift. Pelin was quiet for several seconds. Then, I will note in my cultural assessment that the Terrans appear to use physical objects as repositories for emotional contracts. The patch is not decoration. It is a binding agreement between parent and child, expressed in a material form that survives the death of one party and the decades-long grief of the other. Cale had not thought of it in those terms, but he recognized the accuracy immediately. A binding agreement. Come back. Yes, I will try. The cooperative's formal inquiry convened 4 days after the recovery. Cale presented his findings to a panel of 7, including 2 Pelori delegates whose homeworld existed because of what he was describing. He presented the telemetry data, the flight recordings, the personal log entries. He presented the patch. He had photographs of it taken in high resolution under the survey skiff's documentation lights. The white fabric, the uneven stitching, the child's handwriting, come back. The panel studied the photographs in silence. The senior Pelori delegate, a broad-shouldered elder named Tavrin, spoke first. Surveyor Drenith, you have described a Terran military operation conducted without cooperative knowledge or approval. A single pilot was sent on a mission understood to be terminal. The mission objective was achieved and the rift was closed, saving multiple systems including our own. Is this an accurate summary? It is, Cale said, with one addition. Proceed. The pilot attempted to return. Cale brought up the telemetry data on the inquiry chamber's display. The numbers filled the wall behind him, clean and precise. Here, maximum thrust, 19 seconds. She gained 15 kilometers against a gravitational shear that exceeded her drive capacity by a factor of 3.2. The return was mathematically impossible and she knew it. She attempted it anyway. To what end? Tavrin asked. Cale had thought about this question for 3 days. He had turned it over in his mind with the same methodical patience he applied to hull analysis and debris classification. He had examined it from every angle his training provided. To honor a promise, he said, made to a 6-year-old child. The chamber was quiet. The promise was written on a patch, Cale continued, stitched to her flight suit by her daughter before launch. 2 words, come back. The pilot touched that patch repeatedly during the 4-day transit. Her personal log documents this. She knew the promise could not be kept. She fought to keep it anyway. 19 seconds of maximum thrust against an impossible force, because a child had asked her to come back and she had said she would try. The Pelori delegate who had asked the question sat back in his seat. His secondary eyelids, which Cale knew from xenobiology, indicated deep emotional processing in the Pelori species, closed and reopened twice. I have a question for the Terran liaison, Tavrin said. Valk stood. Yes, delegate. The pilot's daughter, Maren Elody, you mentioned she has petitioned for a search for 23 years. Yes. She knew the mission was terminal. She was told when she was 14. The records were sealed until then. She has known for 34 years that her mother was not coming back. And yet she petitioned. Every year, without exception, 23 formal requests, each one citing the same regulation, the same precedent, the same argument, each one denied on the same grounds, insufficient resources for recovery of non-strategic assets. Each denial acknowledged and followed by a new request the following year. Tavrin's secondary eyelids closed again. I see, he said. I believe I understand now why the pilot attempted to climb. It was not rational. It was not strategic. It was the same impulse that drives a child to stitch a patch to a flight suit and write 2 words on it. What impulse is that? The second Pelori delegate asked. Tavrin looked at him. The refusal to accept that love is subject to mathematics. The third Pelori delegate, who had not spoken until this point, raised a hand. She was young, younger than Cale, with pale markings on her face that he recognized as a cultural signifier of the historian caste. She stood, and the chamber turned to her. Surveyor Drenith, I must inform the panel of something that may be relevant. I have reviewed the population records for the Pelori homeworld. At the time of the rift's projected arrival, there were 18,412,091 individuals living on the planet. She paused. Among them were 6,314 children under the age of 7, approximately the same age as Commander Elody's daughter at the time of launch. The numbers settled into the chamber like weight. I do not raise this for sentiment, the historian continued. I raise it because the mathematics of this event demand it. Commander Elody's daughter asked her to come back. She could not. But 6,314 children on the Pelori homeworld continued to have parents who did come back every day because Commander Elody flew into the rift and they did not have to. 6,000 children who never knew a promise was being broken on their behalf. Valk, standing at the side of the chamber, looked at the floor. Kale saw his jaw tighten and then release. I would like the formal record to note, the historian said, that the Pelori homeworld owes its existence to a Terran military operation that was conducted without our knowledge, funded without our contribution, and executed by a volunteer who died without our gratitude. This is a debt that the Pelori people were not aware they carried. We are aware now. She sat down. The chamber was silent again, but it was a different silence, heavier, more permanent. Kale Drenith completed his formal report 9 days after the initial recovery. The report was 612 pages long, including appendices, telemetry data, photographic documentation, and the cultural assessments provided by Attaché Pelin and the Pelori delegation. It was filed with the Cooperative Central Archive under the standard classification for recovered vessels. But Kale added something to the report that was not standard. At the end of the final appendix, after the last page of technical data, he included a personal addendum. This was unusual. Survey reports did not typically include personal commentary. Kale's department head, cataloger Vennari, reviewed the addendum and allowed it to stand. She did not explain why. She simply signed the approval and returned the file. The addendum read, Personal note, Surveyor Kale Drenith, appended to Report 744-19 Terran. In 11 years of survey work, I have recovered and catalogued remains from 9 species. I have documented the ways in which beings die in vacuum, the physiological processes, the material degradation, the data artifacts left behind. I have developed a professional detachment that allows me to perform this work accurately and without emotional interference. Commander Maren Elody has disrupted that detachment. The Terrans are a species I have studied at a distance. Their military capabilities, their biological resilience, their technological ingenuity. These are documented extensively in our archives. What is not adequately documented is the quality I observed in Commander Elody's final flight. She knew the mission would kill her. She volunteered anyway to save worlds that were not her own, populated by species she had never met. This alone would be noteworthy. But it is not what I wish to record. What I wish to record is the 19 seconds. 19 seconds of maximum thrust against a gravitational shear, 3.2 times greater than her drive could overcome. 15 kilometers gained and then lost. A futile, mathematically impossible attempt to return to a child who had asked her to come back. I have no Vennari framework for this. Our species does not engage in futile actions. When a calculation shows that an outcome is impossible, we accept the calculation. We do not expend energy fighting it. This is rational. This is efficient. This is, I now believe, incomplete. Commander Elody's 19 seconds were not rational. They produced no tactical outcome. They did not alter the mission result. They did not save her life or extend it by any meaningful measure. By every metric available to me, those 19 seconds were wasted. And yet, I have catalogued wrecks for 11 years, and I have never encountered anything that demanded my attention the way those 19 seconds do. She fought because a child asked her to come back. She fought knowing she could not win. She fought because the alternative to fighting was to accept that a promise made to a 6-year-old was subject to the laws of physics, and she was not willing to accept that. Not for 19 seconds. not ever. I do not know what to call this quality. The Terrans themselves seem uncertain. The liaison called it fighting the math. The Pelori delegate called it the refusal to accept that love is subject to mathematics. I am a surveyor, not a philosopher, and I lack the vocabulary for what I observed. But I will say this. In 11 years of cataloging the dead, I have never found a body that changed the way I understand the living. Commander Elody has done this. The patch on her suit, with its crooked stitches and its child's handwriting and its 2 fading words, has done this. Come back. She did not come back. She could not. The math was clear and she knew it from the beginning. But she tried, and the trying matters in a way I cannot quantify but will no longer pretend is irrelevant. End of personal addendum. Lyra Elody was notified of the recovery 6 days after the inquiry concluded. Kale was not present for the notification. He learned of it through Valk, who contacted him 3 weeks later with a brief message. Lyra received the news. She asked one question. She asked whether the patch was still there. I told her yes. She asked if the ink was still legible. I told her yes, faded but legible. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she always touched it. Even when I wasn't there, she would have been touching it. That is why the ink faded, not the radiation, not the vacuum, her thumb. She has requested that the patch remain with her mother's body, and that both be returned to Earth for burial. The Navy has approved the request. The Pelori delegation has asked to send a representative to the service. The cooperative has asked to send one as well. Valk included a second note below the first. There is one more thing. After Lyra was told, she went to her classroom at the Sierra Academy. She teaches advanced navigation, stellar cartography, gravitational mechanics. She stood at her lectern and taught her class for 2 hours. She did not mention the recovery. She did not leave early. She taught the scheduled material in its entirety, including a module on gravitational shear calculations. One of her students later told a colleague that Professor Elody seemed the same as always during the lecture, except that at one point, while demonstrating a thrust versus shear equation on the display, she paused for approximately 4 seconds and touched the left side of her chest, just briefly. Then she continued the equation. The student did not know why. Kale read that and set the message down. He sat with it for a while. A daughter who had been 6 years old when her mother flew into the throat of something hungry, who had grown up to teach the mathematics that had killed her mother, who had spent 23 years writing petitions to find a ship everyone said was gone, and who, upon learning that the ship had been found, had gone to her classroom and taught a lesson on the very calculations that had made her mother's return impossible. And in the middle of that lesson she had touched her chest, where the patch would have been, where her mother had touched it over and over until the ink faded. The gesture had crossed 41 years and the distance between a dead cockpit and a living classroom. The same motion, the same place on the body. The same need to make contact with something that was not there, but had once been promised. Kale filed the liaison's message with his report. Then he sat in his survey skiff, alone, in the quiet of the Vennari shallows where he had found the tumbling ship, and he looked out at the stars. The rift was gone, had been gone for 41 years. The space where it had been was just space now, empty and dark and unremarkable. 3 systems continued their orbits through the region where a wound had once been expanding. 18 million Pelori went about their lives on a homeworld that should not have existed. Children were born there, grew up there, learned language and history and mathematics there, on a world that a single human pilot had saved before most of their grandparents were alive. None of them knew her name. The cooperative's threat classification files recorded the rift's closure as a natural phenomenon, a spontaneous gravitational collapse. The Terrans had not corrected the record until 12 years ago, and even then the declassified files circulated mainly within military and academic channels. The Pelori children learning mathematics on their homeworld, did not know that the mathematics had once pointed toward their extinction, and that a woman named Maren Elody had carried a different set of numbers into the throat of the thing that was coming for them. Kale had received one additional piece of information from the Pelori historian before the inquiry panel dispersed. The young delegate with the pale markings had approached him privately in the corridor outside the chamber. "Surveyor Drenith, I want to share something with you that I did not include in the formal session." "Go ahead." "When the rift was expanding, before Commander Elody's mission, my government commissioned a study on the feasibility of evacuating the homeworld. The study concluded that a full evacuation was impossible within the projected timeline. We could move approximately 2 million people. The remaining 16 million would have to be left behind." She paused. Her expression was controlled, but Kale could see the effort it cost her. The study included a protocol for selecting who would be evacuated and who would remain. The protocol prioritized reproductive age adults and children under 12. The selection criteria were entirely mathematical: survival probability calculations, genetic diversity preservation metrics, resource allocation models. Very rational, very efficient. "What happened to the protocol?" Kale asked. "It was implemented. The lists were drawn up. Names were assigned to transport manifests. Departure schedules were drafted. My mother was on one of the lists. She was 23 at the time, recently married, and she met the reproductive age criteria." The historian met Kale's eyes. "My grandmother did not. She was 51. She was on the list of those who would remain. She would have been left on the homeworld when the rift arrived. She would have died." Kale said nothing. "Commander Elody's daughter was 6 years old when she stitched that patch. My grandmother was 51 when her name was placed on a list of acceptable losses. Neither of them knew about the other, but Commander Elody's decision connected them across species and time and the absolute indifference of gravitational physics. My grandmother is 89 now. She tends a garden. She does not know any of this. She does not know that a human woman she never met decided that the math could be right and still not be the last word." The historian straightened. "I wanted you to know that, for your report, or not for your report, for whatever it is worth." It was worth a great deal. Kale added it to the appendix. Kale thought about the 19 seconds often in the weeks that followed. He thought about them when he cataloged other recs, when he filed other reports, when he processed other data cores with other final transmissions from other beings who had died in vacuum. None of them were the same. None of them carried that specific weight. He found a Tessari freighter with a crew of 12, all dead from a reactor breach. He found a Pelori scout with a single occupant who had died of dehydration after a navigation failure. He documented each with the thoroughness his training required, but none of them had a patch. None of them had 19 seconds of impossible thrust. None of them had a daughter who had spent 23 years writing letters to an institution, asking it to find a ship everyone knew was empty. He had asked Valk, before the man departed, one final question that was not part of the formal inquiry. "The other 40 pilots," Kale said, "the ones who volunteered and were not selected, what happened to them?" Valk looked at him with an expression Kale could not fully read. "They went back to their postings. Some retired. Some took other missions. 3 of them later died in unrelated operations." "Did any of them withdraw their applications before the selection?" "No," Valk said. "All 41 volunteers maintained their candidacy through the final selection process. Every one of them was prepared to fly the mission. Every one of them understood the terminal nature." "Did any of them have children?" Valk paused. 17 of them did. Kale let that number sit between them. 17 parents who had volunteered to die. 17 parents who had looked at the mission brief, understood the phrase one-way deployment, and raised their hands anyway. 17 who would have carried their own patches, their own promises, their own 2-word obligations stitched in crooked handwriting. Why? Cale asked. It was not a sophisticated question. It was not the kind of question a surveyor with 11 years of experience should need to ask, but he asked it. Valk considered the question with what appeared to be genuine care. He looked at the stars through the survey skiff's viewport, at the empty space where the rift had been, at the systems that continued to exist because one of those 41 volunteers had been chosen and had flown. Because the people on those worlds were someone's children too, he said. Cale added that answer to his report. It was, he noted in a final annotation, the most concise explanation of Terran behavior he had ever encountered, and the most difficult to process within a Vennari analytical framework. It was also, he suspected, the closest any non-Terran would ever come to understanding why 41 people had volunteered to fly a ship that could not come back. The derelict was recovered in full and transferred to the Terran naval vessel TCS Waypoint for transport. Commander Elody's body was prepared for the journey back to Earth with a care that Cale observed from the survey skiff's viewport. The Terran crew handled the remains with a formality that went beyond protocol, a slowness and deliberateness that spoke to something deeper than procedure. The patch remained where it was, stitched to her flight suit, the crooked thread holding firm after 41 years. The ink had faded to a gray that was almost the color of the suit itself, but the words were still there, legible if you looked closely, legible if you knew what you were looking for. Come back. Before the Waypoint departed, Valk sent Cale one final communication. It was brief, as all of the liaison's communications had been. Surveyor Drenith, I thought you should know. When Lyra was told that her mother's ship had been found, she did not cry. She stood very still for a long time. Then she said she tried to come back. I always knew she tried. I asked her how she knew. She said because she promised. Cale read the message twice. Then he closed his data terminal and sat in the dark of his skiff for a while, looking at nothing, thinking about promises and physics and the distance between what a calculation proves and what a person decides to do about it. He returned to his survey route the next morning. He cataloged more wrecks, pulled more data cores, processed more evidence of the ways beings ended in the spaces between stars. But he kept a copy of the patch photograph on his personal terminal. He looked at it sometimes in the quiet hours between assignments, when the shallows were empty and the stars were steady, and the void was just the void, not hungry, not reaching, just there. 2 words in a child's handwriting. A promise that physics would not allow to be kept. 19 seconds of full thrust against an impossible force, because a mother had decided that the math could be right and still not be the final answer. Cale did not have a Vennari word for what that was. He was beginning to suspect that the absence of the word was a deficiency in his language, not in the thing itself.